The United States Department of Veterans Affairs is a cabinet-level executive branch department of the federal government, charged with providing lifelong health care services to eligible military veterans at the 170 VA medical centers in the United States. And that's where we come in. Live from the Wisdom for the Blind studios in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this is Insight to the VA. The VA is there to help us. Let's get started. Welcome to Insight to the VA. Insight to the VA. With your host, Douglas Cram.
Hello and welcome to Insight to the VA. My name is Doug Cram. Today we are talking with James Vail, a National Service Director with the Blinded Veterans Association. Jim, how are you doing today?
Hello, doing well.
Good. How's your weather there?
Hot summer weather in D.C.
I think our temperature was 98 degrees today, and our humidity was 98%. Terribly hot and humid here. Okay, we're going to get started with a little bit of your background. Can you first talk about where you were born and where you went to high school?
Well, I was born in California. I finished high school actually in Vancouver, Canada, and then I came back to the States.
Can you talk about your Navy career? What job you did in the Navy?
Yeah, I was a Navy aviation electronics technician, and I maintained the electronic countermeasures, ECM, on the F-18 Hornets during the time of Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I didn't actually serve in theater. I served in California, but I was a maintainer for ECM on F-18s.
Now, did you go to college after your Navy career?
During and after. Actually, after I finished high school, I went to college for a year, and then I enlisted in the Navy. I received a year of college credit for my Navy training and experience. And also, while I was in service, I worked full-time, and I also went to school full-time at the Base Education Center. I attended school at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is considered the Harvard of aviation. So I worked full-time, went to school full-time on the Navy College Fund. The Navy paid 75% of my tuition. And so my total out-of-pocket for my bachelor degree was $3,000. And then also while I was in service, I went on to complete all my coursework for my first master's degree, my master's in business administration and aviation from Embry-Riddle. And that cost me $3,000 out of pocket. And then after service, I went to go work at Alaska Airlines in reservations. And then later I worked my way up to, I was a maintenance planner and technical writer for all of the Alaska Airlines avionics systems. And then I went over to Boeing, and I was on the engineering team that developed the maintenance plan for Air Force Two, the Vice President's airplane. And while I was working at Boeing, I went to school and completed my second master's in aeronautical science, with a specialty in aviation aerospace operations. And I used the GI Bill for that. And Boeing didn't care that I had the GI Bill, and the VA didn't care that Boeing was paying the tuition. So the money I earned from the GI Bill offset the $6,000 out of pocket that I spent for my first bachelor's and my first master's. Later, my vision started to go, and I had all these aviation degrees, but I was legally blind. And at that point, all these glass walls went up, and they stopped sending me to Andrews to work on Air Force Two. They wouldn't let me on the flight line. Imagine they wouldn't let me on the flight line with the white cane. So I had to start all over. So I went back to school again under VA Voc Rehab and completed my education specialist degree in blind rehabilitation teaching in Tucson. And then I went on and also completed my master's in public administration. And then I moved back to Seattle, and I worked as a service officer for about a year with the American Legion. And then I was able to convince Voc Rehab to send me back to school to get my law degree. And I completed my JD, and then I became a licensed attorney.
That was a licensed attorney for the state of Washington, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, I had talked to you some time ago, and we talked about how we each lost our vision. Can you talk about how your vision was impaired?
Yes. While I was in service, I started losing my night vision, and I started bumping into things during the day. And I didn't know what was going on. So I went to my Navy ophthalmologist, and I said, "What's wrong with me, doc? I can't see at night. I'm bumping into things." He said, "Well, you're nearsighted. People who are nearsighted generally have a hard time seeing at night. all he did was write me a prescription for a stronger pair of glasses. He never dilated my eyes. And it wasn't until I left service, I went to my family ophthalmologist, who then diagnosed me with retinitis pigmentosa. And also while I was in service, I was hot pumping an F-18 jet fuel. Then later I was servicing the hydraulics, and I managed to get hydraulic fluid in both my eyes. I burned both my eyes with the hydraulic fluid. After that accident, my acuity started to slowly deteriorate, and it's been getting worse ever since. So after I left service, I saw my family ophthalmologist. He said, I have some bad news for you. You will never fly again. And in fact, you're going to have to stop driving in about 5 years. He was pretty close, because 4.5 years later, it worsened to the point I was legally blind and I had to stop driving. But I forgot to mention, I learned to fly before I learned to drive. I soloed when I was 16 years old with the Civil Air Patrol. So flying was my love. I wanted to be a pilot, and that's why I joined the Navy.
Did you fly in the Navy while you were in the Navy?
I applied for all the academies and also all the ROTC programs. I was in the top 20%. They took the top 10%. But while I was in, I wanted to finish my pilot's license. And I finished my bachelor's. I had 2 years left in service. And I asked my professor, I said, hey, I got 2 years left. I can either go get my master's or I can finish my pilot's license. What should I do? And he said, if you get your pilot's license and something happens to you medically, they can pull your medical like that. But if you get your master's, nobody can take that away from you. And so I'm glad I followed his advice, because had I continued my pilot training, I would have found out I couldn't fly anymore. And I was better off with the master's degree than I was with the pilot's license. But I learned to fly before I joined the Navy, and I wanted to continue that through the NAVCAD program. But while I was in service, that's when I developed the vision loss, and that ended my flying career.
Now, you said that you were refueling an airplane on a hot pump. What does that mean?
Oh, and what I meant, I'm sorry. There's two separate instances. I was hot pumping an F-18. The F-18 pulls up to the fuel pits, and then you open the door and you fuel the airplane while it's running. When you hot pump, you're refueling it while it's running. So I did that, but the injury came later after the airplane was shut down. And I had to, as a plane captain, I had to service the struts with hydraulic fluid. That's when I got hydraulic fluid in both my eyes. And that is some really nasty stuff. The purple hydraulic fluid.
Can you tell me what you did with the American Legion?
So with the American Legion, so I moved back to Seattle from Arizona and went to American Legion. I was looking for employment as a service officer. I showed them the appeal that I wrote, because I had a appeal regarding an overpayment, and they looked at my appeal. They said, wow, you wrote this? Yes. Nobody helped you? Nobody helped me. You're hired. And I wrote a 4-page appeal, along with, I presented 27 exhibits of evidence proving administrative error by the VA and also financial hardship. And that had to do with, I converted they approved me for the GI Bill, and then they converted me retroactively 6 months for VA voc rehab. And the RO was supposed to send the check to Muskogee to refund the overpayment on the GI Bill, but instead they sent me the check a mistake. And then my counselor told me, oh, that's your money. That's the money that we owe you. Because under the GI Bill, you pay your own tuition and books. With voc rehab, we pay that for you. So we reconciled your accounts. That's the money we owe you. You can go ahead and spend it. Okay. So, I spent the money, and then 6 months later, I started getting nasty letters from the VA Debt Management Center saying that I owe that money back to the U.S. government due to an overpayment. And I asked for an audit from the regional office. They refused to do it because they're the ones who made the mistake. I appealed to Muskogee, and they quickly denied it. So I appealed their decision to the Board of Veterans Appeals, and I actually flew out to D.C., and I represented myself, and the judge ruled in my favor. And then Muskogee refused to recognize the board decision. So I went back to the Debt Management Center and asked them for their assistance. I actually paid the money back to protect my credit rating. But even though I paid the money back, they still sent a debt collector after me. So I went back to the Debt Management Center, and 2 weeks later, they sent me a check. And I had the board fax them a decision to the Debt Management Center. But the check came from St. Louis. And I asked the Debt Management Center, hey, that's great that you refunded the money, but why did it come from St. Louis? I thought it was supposed to come from Muskogee. And they said, well, Muskogee refused to pay it, so we had to go to a different RO who would pay it. And then after that happened, my claims file went missing for about 10 months. And somebody had blind transferred it to the Nashville RO. And so I had another claim pending, and they managed to delay my claim by 10 months. So apparently I have some friends in Muskogee. But it worked out because the appeal that I wrote helped get me my job with the American Legion in Seattle. And then from there, that helped me go back to Voc Rehab, and I was able to convince Voc Rehab to pay for law school. Muskogee thought they were going to cheat me out of $3,000. And in the very end, Voc Rehab paid over $200,000 for my law school. So I call that a substantial win. And now I'm using my legal education to help other veterans with their VA claims.
Can you tell me what you did with the Vietnam Veterans Organization?
Sure. So after law school, I graduated back in 2008. It was the worst job market in 30 years for new attorneys in Seattle. So I applied for jobs around the country, and I was hired as the National Service Director for Vietnam Veterans America in Silver Spring, Maryland. And there I oversaw a network of 1,000 service officers nationwide that collectively won about $89 million per year in new claims for veterans. I also worked closely with Rick Weidman with the government relations, and we fought the good fight on Capitol Hill, and we made a big difference for veterans. And so I did that for about 5.5 years.
And you worked for the Board of Veterans Appeals. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I left Vietnam Veterans America, and I was hired as a supervisory senior counsel as a GS-15 at the Board of Veterans Appeals, and I supervised 19 attorneys at the board.
In 2018, you were given an award for working with the Veterans Consortium Pro Bono program.
Oh.
Can you talk about that and the award?
Okay, so that was the David Isbell Law Clerk program. So in my final summer in law school, I came to D.C. as a law clerk with the Veterans Pro Bono Consortium. I was the second law clerk selected under that program. It's called the David Isbell Law Clerk program. And so that was for my my final year in law school. And there I interned with the National Veterans Legal Services Program. And also I interned with the American Legion's Board of Veterans Appeals Unit here in Washington, D.C. And so I was their subject matter expert on blinded veteran claims. So I handled all the blinded veteran claims at the Legion unit at the board. And that was about a 2-month law clerk internship in D.C.
Talk about your authoring of Section 5.2.12.
Sure. So that was also with MVLSP. MVLSP is the publisher for the Veterans Benefits Manual, the BBM. That's considered the Bible or the legal treatise for veteran benefits. And it's published through MVLSP and also through LexisNexis. And I was their author for the section pertaining to blindness and vision loss claims. It's a very thick book. It's about a ream of paper. It gets updated every year. And so that was my section, was given my experience with vision loss claims, I was able to write the section on blindness and vision loss, which is still in use today.
The reason I hesitated on that question is because my computer read it the 5th of February, 2012. I use JAWS. Sometimes JAWS is kind of crazy.
It can be.
You use JAWS as well?
No, I use ZoomText. I also want to add that I was a presenter at NOVA, the National Organization of Veterans Advocates, and that's a group of veterans law attorneys, and I presented to a group of about 250 veteran law attorneys, and I presented on how to rate a blinded veteran case. So I taught 250 veteran law attorneys how to rate blindness and vision loss. It's a very detailed area of veterans law, and eye conditions make up 1% of all service-connected conditions. Service officers and raters don't see too many blinded cases, and when they do, they tend to be fairly complex, which leads to a lot of errors. And so I have a niche in blindness and vision loss cases, so I use my experience to benefit with MVLSP and also with NOVA.
Okay. We're going to take a break here, Jim, so just stand by, please.
Wisdom for the Blind is dedicated to doing everything we can for the blind and sight impaired. If you'd like to bless us with a donation to keep the website, the podcast, the webinars, and the radio station operating, we can't express how grateful we'd be. You can go to the website at w4tb.org. That's w4tb.org and hit the donation button. Or you can mail it to Wisdom for the Blind Incorporated. Attention donations. 1005 Marina Mile Boulevard, Suite 255, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33315. Wisdom for the Blind is a not-for-profit 501c3 organization. Remember, it's tax deductible. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts at Wisdom for the Blind.
Ice cream. All the ice cream in my house, in the world, and most of my stuffed animals.
My video games and, my phone.
What would you give for your freedom? Would you give your eyesight? Would you give ever seeing the sunset again? Would you give the ability to see your children's future? Thousands of brave men and women who served in the United States Armed Forces have given their eyesight in defense of our freedom. And the Blinded Veterans Association wants to give them their freedom back, but it needs your help. Go to BVA.org to find out about how BVA's free programs and services, advocacy, education, peer support, scholarships, and more help America's heroes to not just deal with the emotional and physical issues of sudden sight loss or impairment, but actually work to get them back to the independent lives they deserve to live. Go to BVA.org to find out how you can make a difference. They fought for your independence, and by going to BVA.org, you can find out how to help these veterans regain theirs. Go to BVA.org today.
Okay, Jim, we're back. My next question has to do with the PACT Act, and I see that recently passed. Can you talk about the PACT Act and what a veteran is supposed to do?
Okay, so the PACT Act, it took a long time for this bill to pass, and it took a lot of work from a lot of VSOs. When the VSOs get together, they can move mountains, and we can get a lot more done when we all work together on Capitol Hill. Yeah, so the PACT Act was passed on August 2nd by the Senate. It was passed 3 times in the House, and it passed twice in the Senate and failed once in the Senate, but they finally got it passed. So what this does is it rights a lot of wrongs. So a lot of veterans are exposed to burn pits in Iraq or Afghanistan or other areas, and they're breathing that 24/7. And the VA, until this act passed, we're not service connecting for the elements. So the PACT Act, it expands access to VA healthcare for veterans exposed to toxins during their military service. And for post 9/11 combat veterans, the bill extends the period of time that they have to enroll in VA healthcare from 5 years to 10 years post-discharge. That's a big difference. And then the PACT Act, it codifies VA's new process for evaluating and determining presumption of exposure and service connection for various chronic conditions when the evidence of a military environmental exposure and the associated health risks are strong in the aggregate but hard to prove on an individual basis. I mean, how do you prove you're exposed to toxins if you're in Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Afghanistan? That's why we have presumptions, because otherwise you gotta prove that you were exposed, and it's almost impossible to do. So this provides presumptions to make it easier to get service connected. It also it says here that the legislation removes the need for certain veterans and their survivors to prove service connection if they are diagnosed with one of 23 specific conditions. That's what I was talking about with the presumptions. So if a veteran is diagnosed with one of these 23 conditions and served in a qualifying area during the qualifying time, then they don't need the nexus statement from a doctor to link it all together. You just got to show that you were in the right place at the right time, and you have the qualifying condition. And then let's see, there's a lot here for this bill. There's a lot in this bill. It also helps our veterans who were at Camp Lejeune. It expands benefits for exposure to the toxins at Camp Lejeune. So there's a lot more here. We could spend the whole hour going through the whole bill. But bottom line is, veterans, they serve our country, and if they get hurt, that's a cost of war. And the government has an obligation to take care of our veterans. And so if you're exposed to burn pits, if you're exposed to toxins, the government has an obligation to take care of you. And also it expands the presumption of Agent Orange. So our veterans who served in Thailand or Guam, American Samoa, they're covered under this bill before they weren't. And so it expands the Agent Orange presumption. So I don't think the bill goes far enough. But again, all these bills go to Congress. It's compromise. So it's the most comprehensive bill for toxic exposures ever passed by the U.S. Congress. So it's a big win for our veterans. So again, August 2nd starts the presumption period. Then we're waiting for President Biden to sign the bill into law. Once that's done, then the bill has to be codified. So, the Congress passes a law signed by the president, and then it gets put in the U.S. code. And then the agency, which is the VA, has to then codify it, and it has to go through the rulemaking process. So they have to write the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, to implement the law. And then they have to go through the rulemaking process. It doesn't happen overnight. It could take 6 to 12 months, maybe longer. But once it goes into effect, then veterans will be able to qualify for it. And there's a look back period. I think it's about a year. But the presumption period starts August 2nd. And so what veterans should do is contact their service officer and file a claim. Don't wait a year from now. Go ahead and do it now. You can file, I would recommend filing what's called an ITF, an intent to file. And that creates a point in time to start your claim. You have up to a year to follow through with the qualifying evidence and the formal paperwork. And then as long as you file within that year, then the claim goes back to the date that you filed. But I'd recommend go ahead and file. You don't have to hire an attorney to do this. I'd recommend going to a service officer, whether it's American Legion, VFW, DAV, Blind Veterans Association, Vietnam Veterans America. As long as they're an accredited organization, they're recognized by VA General Counsel, they should be able to help you file this.
So you've just answered my next question. I was going to ask you about all these ads that I'm seeing on TV. I was going to ask you if a veteran should go that route or get with a qualified VSO.
Well, I'm a VSO and I'm also an attorney, and I've seen it on both sides. And my professional recommendation is for most claims, you do not need to go see an attorney. You don't need to pay an attorney to do this. And actually, when you're filing an initial claim, most attorneys won't take it because legally they can't charge you. There's no way for them to get paid. So under the current law, attorneys and agents can charge once there is an appeal. And under the Appeals Management Act, Appeals Modernization Act, the AMA, once there's a rating decision, then you can go retain an attorney or an agent. But again, if you go with an attorney, they're going to charge you anywhere from 20% to 33% of any retro. And I know service officers who can run circles around attorneys. There's a very good one I know in Florida. He's my best service officer when I was at Vietnam Veterans America. So something like this, you don't need to hire a law firm. Now, there are cases where you would need a law firm. If you're on appeal and it's a really complex case, then you might need an attorney. But for filing your initial claim, go to a service officer. And you want to look at somebody who is experienced, but also make sure that the workload isn't too high. Because if it takes them a month to call you back, their workload is probably too high. So, go to the regional office, whether in St. Pete, check out the different VSOs and interview them. And if you don't feel comfortable, don't give them your POA, and they won't be offended because they got plenty of work they got to do. And then there's these outfits out there that they're not attorneys, but they advertise themselves as consultants and they charge you. I would recommend you don't need to pay money for this. You can get it. You can get the claim submitted for free through an accredited representative. There's a website. Just Google VA OGC accreditation search. Again, that's VA OGC accreditation search. And that's the VA's master website that they use to keep track of all accredited attorneys, agents, and VSO representatives. Go to that website. You can search by state, city, state, zip code, and you can find where the representatives are. I would go there and look. But that's my recommendation. For most claims, you don't need an attorney.
Are there time limits on filing a claim? And then are there time limits on filing an appeal?
Okay, so you can file a claim at any time. It's advantageous to file right after service. If you file within a year of leaving service, the claim goes back to the date that you left service. If you file after a year, then it goes back to the date of the claim. But yeah, if you got hurt in service and you wait 10 years to file a claim, you can still file it. It just becomes harder because the VA may come back and say, well, prove to us that this didn't happen after service. So it's to your advantage to file within a year of service. And there's a whole list of conditions under 38 CFR 3.309 of conditions that if you file within a year of service, they're presumed to be caused by service. And so if you file after a year, then you got to prove service connection. So, and then as far as the appeal, there was a recent change a couple of years ago with the Appeals Modernization Act. So you have a year to file your appeal. So if you file a claim for compensation and then it gets denied, you have a year to file the appeal, and you have three options. You can file a supplemental claim, which requires that you submit new and relevant evidence, and then you file that on the paperwork, on the claims paperwork, and then it goes back to the regional office to be re-adjudicated. Second option is the higher-lower review. Once there's a decision, the file is closed, and you can't add any new evidence with the higher-lower review. So that goes to a more experienced rater or decision review officer, and then they look at the file, and they can overturn the prior decision if they feel that it was wrong. And then the third option is you can appeal to the Board of Veteran Appeals. And all three options, you have 1 year to file that appeal to keep it alive. And then let's say you file at the board and they deny your appeal. At that point, you have 120 days to file an appeal with the Veterans Court, or you can file a supplemental claim and take it back to the regional office. You have 120 days to file with the court, or you have a year to file and take it back to the regional office. As long as you have new and relevant evidence, you can keep that claim, keep that appeal alive. This replaces the legacy system, which uses different forms and there is many pitfalls, but the AMA is a much better process. Okay.
Who can file a claim for a blinded veteran?
Well, the blinded veteran can have their spouse help them, or what they need to do is contact a service officer. And here at the Blinded Veteran Association, we have our Veterans Service Program. We have a National Service Officer who can help with filing the claims. And I'm really proud of what we accomplished at BVA, the Blinded Veteran Association, because we use a program called VetPro, and that's a case management software, and it allows us to help any veteran in the country. The old way was you want to be at the regional office because that's where the paper file was, the claims file, and that's where the decision makers are. And back when I was working at the Legion in Seattle, I had access to the files, I had access to the decision makers, and it worked very well. If there was an issue with the claim, I could take it upstairs and talk to someone to get it fixed right away. Now the files have been scanned, everything electronic, the raters are working from home, and with COVID, most people are working from home. And with VetPro, that has allowed us to help any veteran in the country as long as they have an internet connection. So the old days was you'd have to have the veteran sign the form, sign the power of attorney, sign the claim form. And that was, you'd have to email it to them or fax it to them or mail it to them and wait for them to fax it back. It took a long time and the faxes are distorted. Well, now with VetPro, we can have the veteran on the phone, on the speakerphone. We fill out the form for the veteran, and then the veteran can sign on his or her cell phone or iPad or on their computer. And it transmits the signature to our computer, and then we can submit the claim electronically to VA, and we get a confirmation from VA. And so what used to take days or even weeks, we now do in just a matter of minutes. It's much more efficient, and we got that before COVID hit, and so good timing, because when COVID hit, we were able to continue representing veterans, whereas VSOs who had staff at the RO, they had to shut down because they could no longer work at the regional office, where we're completely remote. So we're very agile as far as claims.
Can you give me the phone number for BVA National?
The direct number is 202-371-8880.
The website is bva.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The next question is, what does it mean when I'm 20% or more rated by the VA?
Okay, we call it VA math. A lot of veterans assume you just add the numbers together and that's your percentage, but actually they don't add them, they combine them. So the rating schedule is broken up. You can be rated 0% up to 100% in increments of 10%. So 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 100. And so it starts off, you're 100% whole. And then you subtract your highest rating percentage. So let's say you have a 50% rating and a 20% rating. So you start off, you're 100% whole, you subtract the 50%, so you're 50% whole, 50% disabled. And then with the remaining 50% that's whole, you multiply that by the 20%. So you don't add 50 plus 20 to get 70. What you do is you combine it, and so the 20% gets multiplied by the 50%, so that 20 actually counts as 10. You add the 10 to the 50, and it winds up with 60. So whereas if you add it together, you'd have 70. That's where the confusion comes in. So it's a percentage there's a schedule that you can look it up, or actually there's a really good app in the Google Play Store that's called Vet Calc. I use that to double check VA's math all the time. It's a lot quicker to plug in the calculator, but it's also important for service officers to know how the VA arrives at those numbers. And it's a combination, but it's a percentage. And as veterans' conditions get worse, they can file for an increase. So you may be 20% today. It gets worse. It's good to contact your service officer, say, hey, my condition's gotten worse. My vision's gotten worse. Do I meet the qualification for the next percentage, which may be 50%? And then all that's in the in Section 4 in the rating schedule under Title 38. And then the service officer can look it up and see what the next requirement is. And if you don't meet that requirement, don't file, because you're just you're clogging the system and you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment. The other thing is, whenever you file a claim, the VA can do any of the three things. They can increase you, they can keep it the same, or they can decrease you. And so you always want to do a risk-benefit analysis before you decide to file for an increase, and always talk to your service officer. Don't do it alone. There's too many veterans. They think, okay, it's gotten worse. I need to file for an increase, and they file, and then they get reduced because they went in for the C&P exam, and the exam showed improvement. And under the law, the VA has to rate on the evidence. It's not based on what the veteran thinks it should be. It's based on what the evidence shows, and you apply that to the rating schedule. So your service officer can look at the schedule, they can look at the evidence, and they can see what it should be. And so it's always good to check with the service officer before you file a new claim.
Can you spell the name of that app? I couldn't quite get the name.
Oh, Vet Calc, short for veteran calculator. It's called Vet, VETCALC, called Vet Calc. By the way, they didn't pay me to say that. I just found it in the Google Play Store. And it might even be on the Apple Store too. I have an Android, but yeah, it's under Google Play, and it's called Vet Calc. It's a free app, and it lets you put in all your percentages, and also it takes into account the extra amount for like if both your legs are service connected, then you get an extra amount because it's affecting both your legs or both your arms. But yeah, it's a real quick way to double check the VA's math.
Okay, thanks. Does a veteran need to pay to file a claim or to go through the appeals process?
Yeah, unlike filing a claim with USCIS for immigration claims, which charges you $400 for this form and $600 for that form, VA doesn't charge for forms. The only expense a veteran would have is if the veteran needs a private medical exam. They'd have to pay that out of pocket. But if they can't afford an exam, the VA will provide it for them. But I advise veterans, you're always better off going to your private doctor and getting the exam, it's called the Disability Benefits Questionnaire, or DBQ, that you want to have the doctor fill out and submit that with your claim, because it puts you on a higher ground. Because if you rely on the VA, they'll send you to one of their contract doctors, and you may get a bad exam. Well, then to counter that, the veteran's going to have to go to their private doctor to get the DBQ filled out, and then your private doctor is going to have to explain why he or she disagrees with the VA doctor. And doctors generally don't like to do that. So if you go to your doctor first and get a good exam, VA should be able to rate off that. But quite often, even though you have a good exam with the DBQ, they still want you to see their doctor, and their doctor may disagree, but may not explain why they disagree. They just give you their opinion, but they don't explain in detail why they disagree with your doctor. Well, that's an inadequate exam, and that gives us grounds for an appeal. And under equipoise, if the evidence is equal for and against the claim, the tie goes to the veteran. That's referred to as the benefit of the doubt rule. So really, if the two offset each other, they should grant the claim under benefit of the doubt. But I always tell veterans, you're better off getting your exam first, because if you rely on the VA and it's a bad exam, then you have to go get your doctor, and it's a much steeper climb. But as far as what does the veteran pay, they don't pay anything to file the claim. They don't pay anything to file the appeal. The only out-of-pocket expense is if they have to pay for their own medical exam. The other thing is if they retain an attorney or an agent, usually they'll pay a percentage of any retro one, usually 20 to 33%. But if they go with the Veteran Service Organization, we don't charge for representation.
Now, can you explain what that DBQ is, or DVQ?
Sure. So that stands for Disability Benefits Questionnaire.
Okay.
And it's based off the rating schedule. And it allows the doctor to, rather than having to write a multi-page medical opinion, the doctor checks the boxes. So like for an eye exam, it'll list what they need. They need you to check your acuity, your far and distant acuity, corrected and uncorrected. They want you to do the slit lamp exam. So they dilate your eyes and they look inside your eye and they check all the parts of your eye. They document that. And then they do a visual field test and also an acuity test. You look at the Snellen chart, look for the big E at the top, and they have you read the letters off the chart. That's the acuity test. And that way it's consistent. It lists everything that they need to have checked, and it's written based off the rating schedule. And so it makes it much easier and much more efficient for VA raters to rate that case based off of a DBQ.
How does one check on the status of a claim or an appeal?
There's many different options. The best option is to contact your service officer and have them check for you, because we have access. If we have power of attorney, we can access the veteran's electronic claims file, which is called VBMS, which stands for Veterans Benefits Management System. That replaces the paper claims file. And so we can see what VA sees. So we can go in and see, we can actually see which desk the claim is on, who's working the claim. We can see things that you don't see in e-benefits. So the best option is to have your service officer check the claim. Next option is you can go into e-benefits and they'll give the status in e-benefits, but it's not as detailed as what we can see in BBMS. The third option is they can call the VA 800 number, the 1-800-827-1000. That I do have memorized, and ask them. But, I found, VA is the second largest bureaucracy in the federal government. And if you call 5 different times, you might get 5 different answers. That's just how bureaucracies work. Not just VA, but Social Security and USCIS. And that's why I say veterans are much better off contacting their representative and have the representative check for them. But don't call your representative every day and ask for a claim status, because these claims can take weeks, months, sometimes, over a year. And so you don't want to wear out your welcome and call your service officer every single day asking for a status, because if he or she says, look, it's going to be at least 4 months before we hear anything, then wait the 4 months. Don't be calling your service officer every day, because that just, VSOs are, they're understaffed, they're nonprofits, they're understaffed. And so we're helping as many veterans as we can, and we have to prioritize our work. And veterans, oftentimes there's a delay in returning phone calls to veterans, and we have to do the most serious cases first. So, I had a veteran who was in hospice who was going to die very quickly. And so, I had to focus my energy on that claim, whereas I had 5 veterans who wanted a claim status. I'm sorry, they had to wait because I had to handle the most urgent cases first. So claim status phone calls get the lowest priority, not because we're lazy or we're ignoring the veteran. It's we have higher priority cases to work. So we have to triage our work. Every VSO works in that way. So call your service officer for a claims update, but don't call too often because it creates stress for you and your service officer.
Okay, Jim, I think we're going to take another break here, so please stand by.
VA's Office of Blind Rehabilitation Services estimates there are approximately 130,000 veterans in the United States who are legally blind, and more than 1 million veterans who have low vision that causes a loss of ability to perform necessary daily activities. In this era of instant communication, where we get overwhelmed with data or facts that are useless to unsighted individuals, wouldn't it be great if we could count on news focused on real problems that impact the daily lives of veterans without sight? Introducing Wisdom for Blinded Veterans, an advanced informational portal designed by blind veterans specifically for blind and vision-impaired vets that, like them, are facing challenges every day. Hi, my name is Ben, and I know the frustration. I've struggled in day-to-day tasks for over 20 years since I lost my eyesight. One of my biggest challenges has always been trying to stay up to date with the latest information of my eye disease, local news, and the ever-changing technology. I wanted to be able to have one single site that merged all the data scattered, and that's why we created Wisdom for Blinded Vets. This is a portal that can be accessed via the web, a smartphone app, telephone, email, text messaging, or Amazon's Alexa. It integrates with readers such as JAWS or Apple's VoiceOver and various other tools to give you a seamless experience. This portal will keep us updated on a variety of topics and will share knowledge that can help make our lives easier and more fulfilled. Highlights of the topics covered on the portal include podcasts, events, news, blind rehab and training, information on the BVA and other groups, a list of coordinator and bros list, online groups to interact with fellow vets facing the same challenges, and much more. Give us a try. You will not be disappointed. To learn more about us, visit our website www.w4bv.org. If you're interested in sharing your knowledge, please consider becoming a contributor by logging into our portal and going to the contributor section for more information. Wisdom for blinded veterans, transforming blind veterans' lives.
Okay, Jim, we're back. Can you talk about the 8 groups for VA healthcare eligibility?
Sure. In order to access VA healthcare, a veteran needs to enroll in the VA healthcare system. And they do that by filling out the VA Form 1010EZ. They can do that online, or they can submit it in person at their VA medical center at the eligibility department. And there's 8 VA priority groups. And so VA, in order to enroll you, they have to assign you to one of these 8 groups, whichever one's the most favorable. So the first one is Priority Group 1, and that's reserved for veterans who are rated 50% or more, so the service connected 50% or more for the VA disability. Or if the veteran is considered or is rated unemployable, otherwise known as TDIU, or if you receive the Medal of Honor. So 50% or more service connection, or TDIU, or you have the Medal of Honor. That qualifies you for Priority Group 1. Priority Group 2 is for veterans who are rated 30 or 40% disabling. Then you have Priority Group 3, and that's for POWs, and also if you've received a Purple Heart, or if you were discharged for disability that was caused by or got worse because of your active duty service, or if you're rated 10% or 20%, or if you're rated under 1151. Then you have Priority Group 4, and that's for veterans who are receiving VA aid and attendance or housebound benefits, or if VA determines you to be catastrophically disabled. So if you're legally blind in both eyes, you're considered catastrophically disabled. So it's aid and attendance, housebound, or catastrophically disabled. And you don't have to be service connected for Group 4. You just have to have the catastrophically disabled qualifying condition. All right, next is Priority Group 5, and that's for you're not rated at all for any service disability, or you're only rated 0%, and you have low income, which means you have an annual income level that's below the adjusted income limits, which is based on your zip code, or you're receiving VA pension, or you're eligible for Medicaid. So if you're low income, that's Priority Group 5. Next is Priority Group 6. If you're rated 0% by VA, or if you're exposed to ionizing radiation during atmospheric testing, or during the occupation of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, or if you participated in Project 1112 SHAD, or if you served in the Republic of Vietnam between January 9th, 1962 and May 7th, 1975, or you served during the Persian Gulf War between August 2nd, 1990 through November 11th, 1998, or if you're active duty at Camp Lejeune for at least 30 days between August 1st, 1953 and December 31st, 1987, or if you're currently or newly enrolled in VA healthcare and served in a theater of combat operations after November 11th, 1998, and were discharged less than 5 years ago. And as a note, as a returning combat veteran, they're eligible for these enhanced benefits for 5 years after discharge. And then at the end of this enhanced enrollment period, VA will assign you to the highest priority group that you qualify for at that time. Next is Priority Group 7. You have 7 and 8. And so those are the groups where, if you're not service connected for anything, then what they do is they look at your income. So if your gross household income is below the geographically adjusted income limits, otherwise known as GMT, for where you live, and you agree to pay a VA copay. And then you have Priority Group 8, and that's based on your gross household income, which is above the VA income limits and geographically adjusted income limits, for where you live, and you agree to pay a copay. So the reason they have the two categories, one is based on your zip code, and the other is based on a national threshold. So if you don't meet one, then they see if you qualify for under the other. So those are the 8 priority groups, and I know it's a lot here, but just go to va.gov, just Google VA priority groups, it'll come up, and they're all listed on there. So that's the details for the priority groups.
Okay. We're going to change topics here. Is there anything else you'd like to say about claims?
We could go on for hours about claims, but I think we covered the most important parts. I just want to emphasize it's better to file the ITF and then take the time that you need to schedule to see your doctor to obtain the evidence, and then package it all together, and then have your service office submit it all in one package. It goes through the system much more efficiently, and their standard is 125 days or less. That's their performance standard. They're not hitting that right now because of the huge backlog, but it goes through quicker when you have everything packaged together, because if the VA has to go out and obtain evidence, it bogs down the system. It slows everything down. Work with your service officer. Don't do anything without talking to your service officer.
Okay, in just a minute, we're going to talk about grants, the grants that the blinded veteran is eligible for. But I want you to tell me the story about when you were in college and you scanned books.
Oh, yes. So when I was in law school, I had to request reasonable accommodation to obtain my textbooks in an accessible format. And it would take the publishers about 3 weeks into the semester to get me my books. That didn't work because then I was behind the rest of the semester. And so I went back to Voc Rehab, and they provided me a high-speed scanner that scans an entire law book in 25 minutes. It scans double-sided duplex mode. And I had to take the books to the print shop, have them cut the spine off the book, and then I run the whole book through the scanner, and it would scan the whole thing in about 25 minutes. And so I had to do that for all my textbooks before each semester. It was a lot of upfront work to prepare. But that helped me get through law school, because then I could read my books on my computer using zoom text and reverse contrast, and then have the computer read me the text passages, because my eyes would wear out after about 2 pages. I couldn't see anymore. So I'd have to turn on the speech and have the computer read it to me. So thanks to Voc Rehab, they provided the scanner. So if you're a veteran in Voc Rehab, you're a blinded vet in Voc Rehab, make sure you so you can scan your books. It's much more convenient than have to wait on the publishers to provide you an ebook. Much more convenient than waiting for someone to scan the book for you.
I was able to get most of my textbooks on cassette tape.
That's another option through the Talking Books or through the State Library for the Blind. That's another option.
Yeah, this actually came through the school. The school had a library of books on tape. All right, we're going to change topic here. Can you talk about the grants that blinded veterans are eligible to receive?
Sure. The 3 that I'd like to talk about are there's the housing grants, and then there's the auto grant. I'll start with the auto grant. The VA provides a one-time grant for the purchase of an automobile, and it's about $22,500, maybe it might be $23,000 now. It gets adjusted every year with the COLA. But to be eligible, you have to either have a loss of a limb, an arm or a leg, or a hand or a foot, because that affects your ability to control the vehicle, or a severe burn, or ALS, or blindness in both eyes. And people might ask, well, why does a blinded veteran need to buy a car? Well, because not everybody has access to public transit. And we had a veteran who lives in a rural area, and he was paying Uber $800 a month to drive him to and from work. And so we helped get him his auto grant approved. We got it expedited, and now his wife drives him to work with the vehicle that they purchased using the auto grant, and that saves that family $800 a month. But to qualify for blindness, you got to have blindness in both eyes, and it's more detailed than that, but it's check with the service officer for the details. But it's blindness in both eyes, and what I want to mention with the auto grant is you fill out the form. It's I think it's the 21-4502 form, 21-4502, and you fill out the first 2 sections, submit it to VA, your service officer submits it to VA, and then the service center will verify that you've never used the grant before. They'll look in their system. And then the service center manager or the designee will sign it, and then they'll mail it back to you. with the rating decision. And then you can take that form to the dealer, and then you negotiate the best deal with the dealer, and then they fill out the rest of the form. They submit that to VA, it goes to the VA finance office, and then they have the final say, and then they cut the check and they send it directly to the dealer. So it's a one-time grant, but I urge veterans, make sure when you fill out the purchase and sale agreement with the dealer that the dollar amount due, the cash due, that amount needs to be greater than the grant amount, because the VA will pay the cash due up to the grant amount. If it's less, you'll get paid less and then you'll be shortchanged. They need to change that policy, but that's the policy right now. Otherwise, you're going to have to try to get the dealer to unwind the deal and change the paperwork, and they're not going to do that once it's funded through the bank. So make sure that the cash due, if you're financing part of the car and using the grant to pay for part of the car, structure it in such a way that it shows, if the grant's $23,000, make sure it shows cash due at the bottom, $23,000. If it's less than that, you're going to be shortchanged. And then the other thing is, it may take 4 months for VA to process the form to make the initial determination that you're eligible. If you find a car you want to buy right now, I don't know too many dealers are willing to hold the car for 4 months. So you might want to go ahead and file that claim now, have them mail you the form back in 4 months, and keep that on standby. So when you are ready, you can take that into the dealer, fill out the paperwork, and send that in to the RO. And that'll shave about 4 months off the processing of that claim. And then the other thing is the COLA gets applied. I think it's December 1st of each year. And it's the date you get a COLA that gets applied to the grant. It goes up a little bit due to the COLA. Well, the question is that based on the date that you file the claim? Or do I need to wait till after December to file the auto grant? No, you don't. It's the date that they cut the check is the date that they use to determine the COLA. So if they cut the check November 30th, you're not going to get the COLA for December 1st. So wait till December 1st and then have them cut the check. But the auto grant's a one-time use grant. There's legislation right now. There's a bill S444 in the Senate, and then there's a companion bill in the House. And if those bills are passed into law, it would authorize VA to issue an auto grant every 10 years. VA approves about 2,000 auto grants per year. It costs about $44 million a year, $42 to $44 million per year. But they estimate that if the bill were to pass, I've heard that it may be as high as $200 million per year. So together it would be about $244 million per year for that benefit. And so there's not a whole lot of money left over for the auto grant. And we're held to pay-go. So if this bill were to pass, they'd have to find $200 million either in cuts to pay for it or find $200 million in new taxes to pay for it. That's the challenge. But I urge everyone to contact your senator and ask him to support S444 for the auto grant, because automobiles wore out after about 10 years, and it's a one-time grant. And so what do you do when your car wears out? Well, then you have to pay for it yourself. But if it's renewable, you can get that auto grant renewed every 10 years. And then they provide adaptations for the vehicle too. So if you're in a powered wheelchair, you might need a van with a ramp. And the adaptations you can apply for every 2 years. It's a separate grant. But for the automobile, it's only a one-time grant. It's really important to have that grant renewable every 10 years. All right, so that's the auto grant. If you have any further questions about the auto grant, give us a call and we'll be glad to share with you the details. The other two grants I want to talk about, there's the housing grants. There's the SHA, that's the Special Housing Adaptation Grant. And there's also the SAH, that's the Special Adaptive Housing Grant. So blindness used to be the qualifier for SHA, and today it's about a $20,000 grant. A couple years ago, BVA was instrumental in helping get a bill passed called the Ryan Cools and Paul Benny Special Adaptive Housing Grant. And that's Public Law 116-154. That was passed by the 116th Congress. And that changed eligibility. So blindness in both eyes qualifies you for the SAH grant, which is the $100,000 grant. So we're no longer eligible for the SHA. Instead, we're eligible for the SAH. What does that do? If you're a blinded veteran and you need to modify your house to make it more accessible to you, you can use the grant to pay for that. Usually, it's things like things that'll improve lighting, things that'll reduce glare, and things that'll make your house safer. And you're allowed to access it up to 6 times before the funds are exhausted. That's the SAH. Now, if you used SHA before, that counts as one of the 6 from SAH, but the dollar amount does not offset. So if you use $20,000 before the SHA, they don't deduct that from SAH. They're two separate dollar amounts. There's another grant from Voc Rehab, from the Voc Rehab Independent Living Services, and it's a $96,000 grant. And you can stack the grants on top of each other, so you can use both grants at the same time. And then there's one other grant. It's called HISA, and that's through the hospital. It's through the Veterans Hospital. HISA is the Housing Improvement. I'll have to Google it. I don't have it memorized, but it's HISA. It's a $6,800 grant through the hospital for a service-connected condition, or a $2,000 grant for a non-service-connected condition. It's a one-time use grant. That's useful for if you need to have handholds added to your bathtub or your shower. It'll cover that. If you need to make your house safer, like maybe improve the entryway. Let's say you have steps and you need to have a wheelchair ramp, you might be able to use it for that. But there's things that each grant will pay for, and there's things that they won't pay for. So it's good to mix and match the different grants so you can mix and match their benefits. But to qualify, we need to file the form. It's the 26-4555 form, 26-4555. It goes through the adjudication process at the regional office, and then if they find you eligible, then you contact the SH grant agent, who can then walk you through the process. I actually wrote an article on this. It's published in the VBA Bulletin. If you go to our website, vba.org, look up the bulletin. This was in, I think it was 2 issues ago, but it's in the VBA Bulletin. I outlined the whole process. The VA has its own procedures manual on the SAH grant, and we have access to that. And so if you're a blind veteran and you want to apply for SAH, give us a call and we can help walk you through it. So I guess that's my coverage for the auto grant, SAH grant, SHA grant, the HISA grant, and the independent living grant. Do you have any questions?
Not really about those. I just have a few more questions and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
How long have you been working with the BVA?
I've been with BVA now for 2 years, but actually I've been a member of BVA for about 22 years. But it's great working here with BVA, and we have a great team. We've assembled a rock star team, and it's really an honor to work for our blind vets.
Can you talk briefly about the new BVA Ambassador Program?
Sure. To give you a little bit of history here, BVA used to have the field service program, and we had 7 field reps around the country. Each one had their own region they were responsible for. And they were brought into headquarters back in 2016. But the field reps had a dual mission. They work as service officers, but also they help identify blinded veterans and connect them to blind rehab, VA blind rehab. A lot of blind veterans don't know that VA offers blind rehab services, and they may incorrectly assume that, well, my blindness happened after service, is not related to service, therefore I'm not eligible, which is false. And so it's a good idea to contact one of our service officers for help. Well, what happened is the service officers were part of our veteran service program. They're all here in headquarters. They're not out in the field looking for blind vets. So we created the ambassador program to help fill that need. So the ambassador program, we have ambassadors who are volunteers, and they are the liaison between the blinded vet and our headquarters, particularly with our veteran service program. And so they help identify blind veterans at the Blind Center, but also locally, maybe with their VIST program. The VIST is the case manager for blinded veterans at a VA hospital. It stands for Visual Impairment Services Team Coordinator, or their BROS. The BROS is a blind rehabilitation outpatient specialist or outreach specialist. They actually go to veterans' homes and they help do assessments in your home. But the ambassador program is a way to find blind veterans out in the community, particularly at the blind centers and at the VA hospitals, and educate them on their VA benefits, and also help connect them to blind rehab, and also introduce the BVA, because as an organization, we need to find new members, and we're the blind veterans. They're at the Blind Center. They're at the VA hospital. And so that's where we need to be. We don't have the financial resources to put a paid staff person at every VA hospital or every VA Blind Center. And so we meet that need through the ambassador program. And it's a win-win-win. It's a win for us. It's a win for the VA. But most importantly, it's a win for the blinded veteran to help them connect with the services that they can access to improve their quality of life.
I've always said that increasing membership was done by word of mouth. If you think about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there wasn't any internet. There wasn't any websites, anything like that. Membership was all done by word of mouth. So I'm pretty excited about the ambassador program.
It's a great program, and we've finished our first class from last year. We just started our second class last week. We had about 30, we were in the mid-30s for the first class. The second class, wow, we had over 70 people sign up for it. So the word's getting out, which is fantastic.
Well, Jim, I think we've about come to the end of our time. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Let's see. I just I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. Blindness is, it changes your life, but you don't have to go it alone. That's why we have the Blind Veterans Association. And so if you're a blind vet at home, you're isolated, you're lonely, it sucks to be blind, but there are resources out there to help improve your life. Contact the BVA. If you need help with a VA claim, give us a call. We also have our intake on our website. So if you go to bva.org and look at the tab for the Veteran Service Program, we have a webpage that you can fill out the intake form, or just call our phone number, leave us a voicemail, and then one of our staff, one of our service officers will get back to you. Blindness is, it's very devastating, but it's easier to navigate the world when you're blind if you have resources. And we're here to help blind veterans. I think that's all I have, but I really appreciate your time.
Well, we here at Insight to the VA and Wisdom for the Blind believe in blinded veterans helping blinded veterans, so we're happy to do it. Thank you very much. A lot of information. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and now we're going to hand it off to Ellie for some news and mail.
Thanks, Doug. So let's take a look in the Wisdom for the Blind inbox and see what our viewers have to say this week. A veteran from New York asked, "We really love the podcast series Insight to the VA. If we would like to contribute to keep new episodes coming, how can we help? The best way for listeners to support us is to donate. If you would like to, there are 2 different ways. The first way is to go to the Wisdom for the Blind website at w4bv.org from a browser, then hit the Donate Now button to get to a secure form to fill out. The second way is to mail a check to Wisdom for the Blind Attention Donations at 1005 Marina Mile Boulevard, Suite 255, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33315. All donations will help keep the Wisdom coming and are tax deductible. Thanks for your question. To our listeners, please remember that if you have any kind of feedback, you can always email them to feedback@w4tb.org. Should you need more information on claims, please go to w4tb.org. Or you can also email us at info@w4tb.org. Please remember to download the Amazon Alexa skill Wisdom for the Blind Radio to listen to Wisdom Radio from your Alexa at any time for up-to-date news, podcasts, events, and even some good music. This is Ellie with Wisdom for the Blind Studios. Back to you, Doug, and keep up the good work.
Thanks again to Jim Vail, and thanks also to the BVA. We really appreciate their time. And thanks to Chuck for his donation, which helped us bring you this podcast. This is Doug Cram from Insight to the VA. Take care.
You've been listening to Insight to the VA. The VA is there for veterans like us, but sometimes it can be difficult for people to navigate. And that's why we're here. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, rate, and review. And make sure to tell a friend or 2. That would help as well. Produced by Wisdom for the Blind and VNS Productions, a division of VNS International. From the Wisdom for the Blind studios in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this is Insight to the VA. Signing off.